The space station New Geneva floated quietly in the darkness between stars. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy had come here for the annual Veterans Memorial. Ships of every size and shape filled the docking bays. Some looked like metal, birds, others like floating crystals, and a few resembled giant metal insects. Commander Zexathala sat alone in the Veterans Lounge. Her forearms rested on the table while she stared out the large window at the stars. Her skin was like blue crystal, but it was covered in scars from old battles. Some scars were thin lines, others were deep marks that would never fully heal. She had been a warrior for over 30 years before she retired. The lounge was full of veterans from many different worlds. Most kept to themselves, lost in old memories that still hurt. Some drank strange liquids that helped them forget. Others just sat in silence watching the stars like Zexathala. Jake Morrison walked through the lounge with a small recording device in his hand. He was young for a human, maybe 25 years old, with brown hair and nervous eyes. He worked for Earth Broadcasting Network and had come to the memorial to collect stories from alien veterans. So far, his luck had been terrible. Every alien he approached either ignored him or politely told him to go away. Jake stopped near a table where 3 Krillian veterans sat together. The Krillians looked like giant lizards with 6 legs and sharp teeth. They had been part of the old hegemony that used to control large parts of the galaxy. "Excuse me," Jake said in his best diplomatic voice. "I'm a reporter from Earth. Would any of you be willing to share your war experiences for a documentary?" The largest Krillian looked at Jake with yellow eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. "Human," the creature said through his translator device. "We do not speak of those times. Find someone else to bother." Jake nodded and moved away. He had heard the same response dozens of times already. Most aliens seemed uncomfortable talking about their wars, especially if humans had been involved. Jake was starting to think his editor had sent him on an impossible mission. He was about to give up when he noticed Zexathala sitting alone. Unlike the other veterans who wore military uniforms or ceremonial clothing, she wore simple gray robes. But Jake could see the scars on her crystal skin, and something about the way she sat told him she had seen terrible things. Jake walked over to her table slowly. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I'm Jake Morrison from Earth Broadcasting Network. I'm collecting stories from veterans for a memorial documentary. Would you be willing to talk with me?" Zexathala turned her head to look at him. Her eyes were like small blue suns, bright and ancient. She studied Jake's face for a long moment without speaking. Other veterans had looked at him with annoyance or dismissal, but Zexathala's expression was different. She looked sad, almost pitying. "You want to know about war, human?" she asked. Her voice came through the translator as musical but heavy with old pain. "Then sit. But understand this clearly. Once I tell you about your people, about what I saw when the hegemony invaded your world, you cannot unhear these words. They will stay with you forever." Jake felt a chill run down his spine, but he sat down across from her. He placed his recorder on the table and activated it. "I understand. Please tell me what happened." Zexathala was quiet for several minutes. She seemed to be gathering her thoughts, or maybe her courage. Finally, she began to speak. "I was a tactical observer during the human hegemony war. That's what your people call it now. We just call it the day we learned to fear." She paused and looked out the window again. 43 years ago, the Krillian hegemony decided to expand their territory. They had already conquered 47 different species in the previous century. It was easy work for them. Jake listened carefully, not wanting to interrupt. "The hegemony had a simple method," Zexathala continued. "They would arrive at a planet with overwhelming force. Their ships were massive, their weapons were powerful, and their armies were experienced. Most species would surrender after the first battle. The smart ones surrendered before any fighting began." She turned back to look at Jake. "Your species had been in space for less than 200 years. Your weapons were primitive compared to ours. Your ships were tiny metal boxes compared to our dreadnoughts. By every calculation, by every piece of logic we understood, conquering Earth should have taken less than 1 day." Zexathala's 4 hands moved restlessly on the table. I was aboard the flagship Dominion's Edge when we approached your solar system. There were over 2,000 hegemony ships in the fleet. We had conquered entire sectors with smaller forces. The fleet commander was so confident that he brought me along to study human military tactics for future reference. It was supposed to be a simple observation mission. Jake felt his heart beating faster. He had heard stories about the war, but always from the human perspective. He had never heard an alien veteran describe it. The first sign that something was wrong came when we detected your defense platforms around Earth. They were small and weak, but there were hundreds of them. Most species build a few large defensive stations. You built thousands of small ones. Our analysts laughed. They said it showed how primitive your thinking was. Zexthala's crystal skin began to darken slightly, a sign of distress in her species. Then we intercepted your communications. Most species we conquered would send messages asking for terms of surrender, or begging for mercy, or trying to negotiate. Your leaders sent one message to every human ship and station in the system. She paused, her bright eyes becoming distant with memory. The message was simple. It said, all human vessels, all human stations, all human personnel. The enemy has come to our home. They threaten our families, our children, our way of life. There will be no surrender, there will be no retreat. Fight until your last breath and then fight some more. Earth remembers her children. Jake felt goosebumps rise on his arms. What happened next? Zexthala looked directly at him. That's when we learned the first important thing about humans. You don't have soldiers and civilians like other species. You just have humans who haven't been pushed far enough yet, she gestured toward the window where stars twinkled in the distance. The first human ship that attacked us wasn't even a warship. It was a cargo hauler named Phoenix Rising. The pilot was a civilian named Alex Chen. He loaded his ship with explosives and rammed it directly into one of our cruisers. Jake's mouth fell open. He committed suicide? Not suicide, Zexthala corrected. Sacrifice. There's a difference. Suicide is about ending pain. Sacrifice is about protecting something you love more than your own life. Zexthala reached for a small cup of blue liquid that sat on the table. Her 4 hands shook slightly as she lifted it to her lips. Jake noticed that other veterans in the lounge had stopped their conversations and were listening to her story. Even the Krillian veterans who had refused to talk to him earlier were now paying attention. After Alex Chen destroyed our cruiser with his cargo ship, we thought it was just one crazy human, Zexthala continued. But then it happened again, and again. A passenger liner called Morning Star rammed into our destroyer. The pilot was a woman named Maria Santos. She had 300 civilians on board, including her own family. Jake felt sick to his stomach. She killed her own family? No, Zexthala said firmly. She saved them, because if that destroyer had reached Earth's surface, thousands more families would have died. Maria Santos chose to sacrifice 300 lives to save thousands. This is how humans think during war. You calculate the cost and you pay it no matter how much it hurts. The alien veteran stared into her cup for a moment. Our fleet commander ordered all ships to maintain distance from human vessels. He thought this would stop the ramming attacks. But humans adapt quickly. They started loading their civilian ships with nuclear warheads and launching them like missiles. Old freighters, personal yachts, even space taxis became weapons. Jake activated his recorder again to make sure he was capturing everything. How did the hegemony respond? We moved to the second phase of our attack plan, direct assault on your military installations. Zexthala's crystal skin darkened further. Luna Station was your primary research facility orbiting Earth's moon. It had maybe 50 military personnel and 200 scientists. Our intelligence said it was lightly defended. She paused and looked around the lounge. Several alien veterans nodded grimly, recognizing the name Luna Station. Fleet Admiral Kate Sullivan commanded your Luna Defense Force. When our ships approached, she received orders from Earth Command to evacuate the station and retreat to Earth's defense grid. Any reasonable military commander would have followed those orders. Luna Station was impossible to defend against our numbers. Jake leaned forward, but she didn't retreat. Admiral Sullivan sent a message back to Earth Command that became famous throughout the galaxy. She said, "Luna Station will not be abandoned. Every hour we hold here is one more hour for Earth's children to prepare. We will make the enemy pay for every meter of space." Then she cut communications and prepared for battle. Zexthala stood up from her chair and walked to the large window. Jake followed her, along with several other veterans who were now openly listening to the story. "The Battle of Luna Station lasted 3 days," she said, looking out at the stars. "Admiral Sullivan had 12 small patrol ships and 2 outdated frigates. We sent 300 vessels to take the station. By all logic, the battle should have ended in 30 minutes. A Krillian veteran named Vorthak approached them. He was one of the aliens who had refused to speak with Jake earlier. "I was there," he said quietly. "I commanded one of the assault groups." Zexthala nodded at him. "Then you remember." Vorthak's yellow eyes looked haunted. "The humans turned Luna Station into a fortress. Every corridor became a kill zone. Every laboratory became a weapons factory. Every scientist became a soldier. They used their research equipment to create new kinds of explosives. They turned their own air recycling systems into poison gas dispensers." Jake looked between the 2 alien veterans. "You were fighting each other?" "Yes," Zexthala said. "But now we understand something we didn't then. We were both traumatized by the same thing. Humans fighting like cornered animals who refused to die." Vorthak continued the story. "Admiral Sullivan didn't just defend Luna Station. She attacked us. Her ships would pretend to retreat, then suddenly turn and ram our vessels. Her ground forces would surrender, then detonate explosives when our troops came to capture them. Nothing they did followed normal military tactics." "Because they weren't following military tactics," Zexthala explained to Jake. "They were following survival instincts. When most species are overwhelmed, they surrender and hope for mercy. When humans are overwhelmed, they become more dangerous, not less." Jake shook his head in amazement. "How did the battle end?" "On the 3rd day, Admiral Sullivan's last ship was crippled and floating dead in space," Vorthak said. "We surrounded it and demanded surrender. Sullivan responded by activating her ship's self-destruct sequence and ramming it into our command vessel. She killed herself and took 200 of our officers with her. But that wasn't the worst part," Zexthala added. "As Admiral Sullivan died, she transmitted one final message to Earth. She said, 'Luna Station bought you 3 days. Use them well. The enemy bleeds, and anything that bleeds can die.'" Jake felt chills running up and down his spine. "What did that message mean?" "It meant that humans had learned our weakness," Zexthala explained. "We had superior technology and numbers, but we weren't prepared for total war. When Krillian soldiers die, their families mourn and demand an end to fighting. When human soldiers die, their families demand revenge." Vorthak nodded slowly. "After Luna Station, everything changed. Your species activated something called Total War Protocol. Every human settlement became a military base. Every human civilian became a potential combatant. Every human child learned to make weapons. I was assigned to study human settlements after we landed ground forces on Earth," Zexthala said. "What I saw there broke something inside me that has never healed." Jake waited for her to continue, but she seemed lost in dark memories. "Tell him about the children," Vorthak said quietly. Zexthala's 4 hands clenched into fists. Human children, some barely old enough to walk, helping their parents build explosive devices. Elderly humans too weak to fight, teaching teenagers how to make poison gas from cleaning supplies. Families working together to dig tunnels under our bases, planning to collapse them while our soldiers slept. "It wasn't just soldiers fighting soldiers anymore," Vorthak added. "It was an entire species fighting for survival. Every human we captured would rather die than give us information. Every human settlement we took would be booby-trapped to kill us after we occupied it." Jake felt overwhelmed by what he was hearing. How could children do such things? Because their parents taught them that the alternative was extinction, Zexthala said simply. Human parents didn't see their children as innocents to be protected from war. They saw them as the next generation of defenders who had to learn to fight or die. She turned back to face Jake directly. "That's when we realized our mistake. We thought we were conquering a primitive species. Instead, we had awakened something that should have been left alone. We had threatened human cubs, and there is nothing more dangerous in the universe than a species protecting its young. More veterans had gathered around Zexathala and Vorthak as they told their story. Jake noticed that some were from species he had never seen before. A tall, thin creature with silver skin stood near the back. Two floating beings that looked like jellyfish hovered nearby. Even the station security guards had stopped their patrols to listen. Zexathala sat back down at her table, but now she was surrounded by a crowd of listeners. Her crystal skin had turned almost black with the weight of her memories. The war reached its turning point 6 months after Luna Station, she said. By then, hegemony forces controlled most of Earth's major cities, but controlling them and holding them were different things. Every day our soldiers died from booby traps, poison, sniper attacks, and suicide bombings. Vorthak moved closer to the table. Our commanders thought the humans would eventually get tired of fighting. Most species do. War is expensive and painful. Civilians usually pressure their leaders to make peace after enough soldiers die. But human civilians were the ones demanding more war, Zexathala continued. They sent messages to their government saying things like, "Don't you dare surrender while aliens walk on our soil," and "Fight until every last invader is dead." The longer the war went on, the angrier humans became. Jake shook his head in amazement. Most people want war to end quickly. Most people aren't human, said a new voice. Jake turned to see another alien approaching their group. This one looked like a giant insect with green skin and multiple eyes. "I am Kethvar. I fought in the same war, but on a different continent." Zexathala nodded at the newcomer. "Kethvar was at the Battle of New York. Tell him about Major Ryan Clark." Kethvar's multiple eyes focused on Jake. Major Clark led the Kabim, human resistance in the North American sector. He was different from other human commanders we had faced. Most human officers fought with anger or desperation. Clark fought with cold calculation. "What made him different?" Jake asked. "He understood that conventional warfare wasn't working," Kethvar explained. "So he stopped fighting conventionally. Clark's unit didn't just attack our bases. They destroyed everything around our bases. Water supplies, power stations, food distribution centers. They made it impossible for us to stay in one place for more than a few days." Zexathala's voice became quieter. "I was assigned to investigate Clark's methods. What I found changed how I understood human warfare forever." She paused and looked around at the gathered veterans. Clark's team had captured a hegemony supply depot outside the ruins of Chicago. It was heavily defended, with over 500 of our best soldiers. Any normal attack would have failed with massive casualties. Jake waited for her to continue. Instead of attacking directly, Clark spent 2 weeks studying the base. He learned our schedules, our patrol routes, our supply deliveries. Then he did something that no other species had ever attempted in galactic warfare history. Vorthak made a sound that Jake's translator interpreted as a shudder. He turned our own base into a weapon against us. Clark's team infiltrated the base over several nights, Zexathala explained. They didn't steal weapons or kill guards. They were much more clever than that. They poisoned our water recycling systems with a slow-acting toxin that would take 3 days to show symptoms. They released engineered viruses into our air filtration systems. They planted explosive charges throughout the base's foundation. Jake felt his stomach turn. "That's biological and chemical warfare." "Yes," Kethvar said simply. "Methods that were considered too horrible for civilized warfare. But humans don't care about civilized when their species is threatened." Zexathala continued the story. "The attack began on the 4th day. By then, half our soldiers were sick from the poisoned water. The rest were having trouble breathing because of the contaminated air. When Clark's team finally attacked, they weren't fighting healthy soldiers. They were fighting dying ones. But that wasn't the worst part," Vorthak added. "When our commanders realized what was happening, they ordered a full evacuation of the base. As our ships tried to leave, Clark detonated the foundation charges. The entire base collapsed, trapping hundreds of our people inside." Jake stared at the alien veterans in horror. "He buried them alive?" "Some of them," Zexathala said. "Others died from the poison or the virus. A few managed to escape, but they were so sick they died within hours. Out of 500 hegemony soldiers, only 12 survived, and they all needed months of medical treatment. The attack was a complete success from a military perspective, Kethvar said. Clark's team suffered 0 casualties. They destroyed a major enemy stronghold and eliminated 500 enemy soldiers. By any measure, it was brilliant. Jake looked around at the alien faces surrounding him. But I met Major Clark after the battle, Zexathala said quietly. I was captured during a reconnaissance mission gone wrong. Clark interrogated me personally. She closed her bright blue eyes and seemed to be reliving the memory. I expected him to be proud of his victory. Most successful commanders show satisfaction or joy after a major triumph. Clark showed nothing. What do you mean, nothing? His eyes were completely empty, Zexathala explained. Not angry, not happy, not sad, just empty. Like something inside him had died. He asked me questions in a flat, emotionless voice. When I didn't answer, he didn't threaten me or hurt me. He just stared at me with those dead eyes until I started talking. Vorthak nodded grimly. We saw this in many human commanders as the war progressed. The longer they fought, the more victories they won, the more hollow they became. They were winning, but victory was destroying them from the inside. I asked Clark why he used such terrible methods, Zexathala continued. He showed me a photograph of 2 small human children, a boy and a girl, maybe 6 and 8 years old. He said they were his nephew and niece. Jake waited for her to continue. Clark told me that his brother had lived in Chicago before the invasion. When hegemony forces took the city, they used civilians as human shields. Clark's brother, his wife, and their 2 children were killed in the crossfire. Clark said he found their bodies 3 days later. The lounge had become completely silent. Even the background hum of the station's machinery seemed quieter. That's when I understood, Zexathala said. Clark wasn't fighting for victory or glory or conquest. He was fighting for revenge, and there is no limit to what a human will do for revenge. Kethvar spoke up. After Clark's attack, hegemony morale collapsed. Our soldiers were terrified to leave their bases. They knew that any mission could be their last, and that death might come from poisoned water, contaminated air, or collapsing buildings. The final space battle happened 2 weeks later, Zexathala said. Admiral Lisa Wong commanded what remained of the human fleet. She had maybe 200 ships left against our 3,000. By every rule of warfare, she should have retreated to a safer position and tried to negotiate. Jake felt he knew what was coming. But she didn't retreat. No, Zexathala said with something that might have been admiration in her voice. Admiral Wong did the most human thing possible. She attacked. The Veterans Lounge had become completely packed with listeners. Veterans from dozens of different species crowded around Zexathala's table, hanging on every word of her story. Jake noticed that even the station's maintenance workers had stopped their duties to listen. Word had spread throughout New Geneva that something important was happening here. Zexathala looked exhausted from telling her story, but she continued. Admiral Lisa Wong's final battle plan was so insane that our tactical computers couldn't even calculate the probability of success. They just marked it as impossible. What was her plan? Jake asked. Vorthak answered for her. Wong divided her remaining ships into 3 groups. The smallest group, maybe 30 vessels, would attack our main fleet directly. This was obviously a suicide mission designed to draw our attention. The second group would attack our supply lines, Kethvar added. Another suicide mission, but it would force us to split our forces to protect our support ships. Zexathala nodded slowly. The third group, led by Wong herself, would do something that had never been attempted in the history of space warfare. They would ram our command ship at maximum speed. Jake felt his mouth go dry. The entire group? All 130. Remaining human vessels, Zexathala confirmed. Wong sent a message to her fleet before the attack began. She said, "Today we end this war. Not with surrender, not with negotiation, but with the complete destruction of every enemy ship in our solar system. Follow me into hell, and we'll drag them down with us." A new alien veteran approached their group. This one was tall and thin, with silver skin that seemed to glow faintly. I am Zaresh of the Silver Coalition. My people sent observers to witness the final battle. We wanted to see how primitive species conducted warfare. Zexathala looked at the newcomer with interest. What did your observers report? Zaresh's glowing skin dimmed slightly. That we had been wrong to call humans primitive. What we witnessed that day changed how the Silver Coalition views warfare forever. Jake activated his recorder again, making sure to capture everything. Admiral Wong's attack began exactly as our computers predicted. Zaresh continued. The first human group attacked our main fleet and was destroyed within minutes. The second group managed to damage several supply ships before being eliminated. Our commanders were confident that the battle was nearly over. Then Wong's group appeared on our sensors, Vorthak said. 130 human ships flying in perfect formation directly toward our command vessel. Our gunners opened fire immediately. Zexthala's crystal skin had turned almost completely black. I was on the bridge of the command ship when Wong's fleet attacked. I watched human vessels explode one by one as our weapons hit them, but the survivors kept coming. As each ship was destroyed, the remaining ships moved closer together and flew faster. They weren't trying to avoid our fire, Kethvar explained to Jake. They were using their destroyed ships as shields for the survivors. Every human death bought the others a few more seconds of flight time. Jake shook his head in amazement. How many ships reached the command vessel? 15, Zaresh said quietly. Out of 130 ships, 15 survived the final approach. But those 15 ships changed the course of galactic history. Zexathala stood up and walked back to the window. The crowd of veterans followed her, creating a semicircle around her as she continued the story. Admiral Wong's ship, the Earth's Fury, was the first to reach us. As it approached, she broadcast one final message to the surviving hegemony forces. She said, "This is what happens when you threaten our children. Remember this day, and never come back." Then she rammed her ship into our command bridge at maximum velocity, Vorthak added. The explosion killed over 2,000 hegemony officers, including our supreme commander. But Wong wasn't finished, Zexathala continued. The other 14 human ships hit different parts of our command vessel. The engine room, the weapon systems, the life support centers. They had planned their attack to cause maximum damage with minimum ships. Jake felt goosebumps rising on his arms. Did the command ship survive? Barely, Kethvar said. But it was completely disabled. No weapons, no engines, no communications. We were floating helplessly in space, waiting for rescue ships that might never come. Zaresh stepped forward. That's when something remarkable happened. The surviving human ships in the system didn't attack the disabled command vessel. They surrounded it and offered medical assistance. Jake looked confused. They helped their enemies? Admiral Wong had left specific orders, Zexathala explained. Any hegemony forces that survived the battle and agreed to leave human space immediately would be allowed to go in peace. Any forces that refused would be destroyed. Most of our fleet commanders were dead, Vorthak said. The survivors had no choice but to accept Wong's terms. We abandoned Earth and retreated to hegemony space. But the war didn't end there, Kethvar added. 2 months later, human ships appeared in hegemony territory, not to attack but to deliver a message. Zexathala turned back to face Jake and the crowd of listeners. The message was simple. Earth offered a peace treaty with 3 conditions. First, the hegemony would never again attack human space or human colonies. Second, the hegemony would pay reparations for the damage caused during the invasion. Third, any hegemony forces that entered human space for any reason would be considered an act of war. And if the hegemony refused these terms, Jake asked? Then, humanity would bring the war to every hegemony world, Zaresh said. They made it clear that they had the technology and the determination to do exactly that. Zexathala's skin began to lighten slightly for the first time since she had started her story. The Hegemony Council voted unanimously to accept the human terms. Not because we were weak, but because we were terrified. We had seen what humans could do when fighting for survival. None of us wanted to see what they could do when fighting for conquest. Jake looked around at all the alien veterans surrounding him. How did this change things in the galaxy? Everything changed, Zaresh said simply. Before the human hegemony. War. Most species saw warfare as a political tool. Something you used to gain territory or resources or influence. Humans showed us that warfare could be something else entirely. What do you mean? Jake asked. Zexthala answered him. Humans showed us that some species will fight with everything they have, sacrifice everything they own, and pay any price to protect what they love. Most of us fight wars to win something. Humans fight wars to save something. Vorthik nodded. Agreement. After the war, the Galactic Council created new rules for warfare. No species is allowed to attack civilian populations. No species is allowed to threaten another species with extinction. These rules exist because of what humans taught us. And what was that lesson? Jake asked. Zexthala looked directly at him, with her bright blue eyes. That there are some species in this galaxy that you should never ever threaten, because they will not stop fighting until either you are dead or they are. And humans are very, very hard to kill. The crowd of veterans began to disperse slowly, returning to their tables and their private memories. But many stopped to shake Jake's hand or pat him on the shoulder. Some spoke words of respect for humanity. Others simply nodded with understanding. Jake turned off his recorder and sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by what he had heard. Thank you for telling me this story. Zexthala placed one of her 4 hands on his shoulder. Your people call it the Human Hegemony War. We call it the day we learned to fear, but it was also the day we learned to respect. She looked out the window one more time at the stars beyond. A human patrol ship passes by this station every few days. When I see it, I feel the same way I would feel watching a sleeping predator, respectful, cautious, and very grateful that it's on my side. Jake gathered his equipment and prepared to leave, but Zexthala stopped him. One more thing, human. Your species earned its place in the galaxy not through superior technology or brilliant diplomacy. You earned it through the simple, terrifying demonstration that you would rather die than surrender. That's a lesson the galaxy will never forget.